So this video is a brief overview of the fundamentals of LangGraph and how it works without getting too in the weeds of code. And what is LangGraph? Well, LangGraph is essentially an orchestration framework, development framework that makes it easier to build reliable agentic applications. That's applications where AI uses reasoning to make decisions. So, for example, we have this application built by a company called Replete, and Replete Agent essentially allows you to just type in natural language what you want to build, and it's able to build a full stack or help you build a full stack application based on what you said. So here you can see I said build a full stack AI chat application, and you can see it's going step by step in terms of the process, and along the way you can see it asks for permission with different things or feedback. This is what is called human in the loop, right? The human being is asked at different checkpoints for permission or feedback to move to the next step. We also have these things called checkpoints where you can roll back. Maybe you get further down, but you want to roll back and continue from there because you want to make some tweaks. But you can see all the way from even creating a database, and further down, you can see that it basically builds out the application, and here it's asking me for to test it so that it can take another step. So this is an example of this is obviously in the coding domain where an AI agentic application is being powered by LangGraph as this framework that the developers use to give them control, flexibility in building the AI application. You also have other case studies, equity research, customer support, social media. So there's different use cases where it's being applied. And so let me, go straight into explaining how it works on a high level. So if you've come across LangChain before, or this idea of chains, it's just simply the idea of you take a prompt, you combine with a model, and you have an output. So if you've been playing around with ChatGPT, you're not familiar with using APIs or things like that, it's just simply you provide the prompt. So here, what is the latest OpenAI model? We send that to the prompt. So we type it, we press enter, it goes to the model processes, and then it gives a response. And this was the premise behind LangChain. So LangChain was the predecessor before LangGraph. So LangChain is also a development framework, but it's general purpose, whereas LangGraph is more focused on AI agency, reasoning, control over agentic steps. And so we can see that this is pretty straightforward, right? But here's the problem. We know as of the 1st of February 2025 that this is not the latest OpenAI model. The latest OpenAI model is 03 Mini. So what we want to tackle is a situation where a user or an application has a question or query coming in, and we want the model to apply reasoning to decide whether it should go and give a direct response based on the knowledge that it's been trained on, or it goes outside of itself through an API or access to other documents outside of itself to answer the question. So we can expand on what we saw previously and have something like this, where we'll call more of a router architecture. So you're still going to ask the same question, but this time the model has two choices. It's either going to answer the question directly, so it's going to answer the question based on its knowledge base, or it's going to go and search the web and retrieve information and take that information, so some search results that are relevant to the question, and pass it as context to the model, and then the model is going to generate an answer. So you've probably experienced this, with the latest models in ChatGPT interface or DeepSeek, where there's a search option, and when you click on that search option, when you ask a question, the model is essentially going to try and figure out based on, or infer based on your question, whether it should go search the web or respond. So here we would, in the back end, or from a programmatic point of view, the model will have some sort of a prompt. So this prompt would be something along the lines of, if the question is related to recency or news, use the, return this. And then we take that and we trigger the web search function. Otherwise, just give a direct answer. It would be something as basic as that. But the point is, now it's applying some level of reasoning to choose this or that. Now let's take it a step further. Now we're dealing with autonomy, or a flow that's more autonomous. Let's say instead of just simply asking, a question like, what is the latest OpenAI model? And here it's able to get the answer right because it went to the web. What if the question is something like, write a brief report about the latest OpenAI model? So now we have to do two things. The model has to figure out, well, first of all, what is the latest OpenAI model? Then what is the structure of this report that I'm about to produce? So we have this, goes to the model, and then we have this, what you want to call a sub process going on here. So if the question wasn't related to something recent, maybe it was something like, what is music? It would just go here, the model will realize it's a general question and just give an answer. If, however, it's related to latest news or something, we will then go into this web search sub process. And in here, we can have maybe one step for creating a research plan, another step where it's conducting the research, and then you have this loop, right? So you have this loop where this conduct research is actually another model. It could be the same model, but it's in a different context. And the job of this model, or this agent, is to effectively search the web for different components of its research report. So maybe one component is, get an overview about the model. So it goes to the web, it sends a particular query to the web search tool. That's an API that's going to call the web. It's going to fetch some search results, come back, and then write for that particular section. The next section might be some research papers about the model. So you can see how this loop, where it's going back and forth between this web search and filling out different parts of the report, it keeps doing that until it has sufficient information to complete the report. And then once it's done, it's going to return the research report outline to the original model. You can call this the orchestrator, right? Or a supervisor. And there's all different types of agentic architectures we'll talk about later on. But this model can take the research report and then, augment it in some way. Maybe we want to, just do a final pass through. And then it's going to provide a final answer. So here we have a report on the latest OpenAI 03 Mini. So this is how we go from the simple chain to routing. So there's reasoning of more like an if-else to more autonomy. And where LangGraph comes in, is basically making this entire process a lot more, giving us control over each component, giving us the visibility of what's going on in each different component as well, to debug and have control from of each agentic step. So this just boosts reliability, as well as trying to optimize for autonomy if your use case relies on that. So what does a LangGraph application look like? So I'm going to jump to Studio. All right, so I'm in LangGraph Studio. LangGraph Studio is just a visual interface of LangGraph components. So when an application is built using LangGraph, the framework, LangGraph Studio is provided with it to help you visualize the workflow that you've built and debug and kind of test it before you deploy. So here's a simple agent that I built for this video, and it kind of follows more of this architecture. So you can see we have a start point, we have an end point, we have a classify query component, where the job here is essentially just figure out what type of question this is. Is this a general question, or is this a question that requires going to the web? If it's a general question, we go down here and then we answer the general question and we end. If it's a web search question, we fetch the data from the web, we pass it as context to the model, and then we end. So for example, if I say, what is music? It's a general question. So I'm going to submit. And if you see on the right, it's classified that this is a general question. So it's gone down the left side and answered plainly. And the good thing about LangGraph Studio is that you can see things like latency, speed. You can, rerun from different sections, but we'll come to that later on. I'm just trying to give an intuition of how this stuff works. So that was just asking a general question. But if I ask the question that we had here, which is, what is the latest OpenAI model? You can see it classifies as a search. It fetches the search information, right? We can see the search results here. And it's able to correctly answer the question based on the provided context. The latest model is 03 mini, which is correct. So you see how we've been able to use LangGraph to essentially give agency to the model to classify the queries so that we can route and generate an answer that is contextually correct. Now, just going into the weeds just a little bit more, even though we're not going to touch code, just stay high level for a second. This is essentially how LangGraph, the framework, tries to break down the different steps into its own kind of language, if just to explain, because this is the language the framework uses. This is me trying to make it, into the more obvious to you. So every LangGraph workflow will start with a start. Start is just a special, it's a special type of point, just telling the workflow it's about to begin. So you saw that here. It's just a special symbol, the same as end. End is also a special symbol. Now, when you connect, when you go from, in quotation, one place to another, LangGraph calls this an edge. So this is an edge, or here it's an edge. We're going from start to LLM, or you're going from direct answer to end. Now, each component or each point where an action is taken, and this action can be anything from a model doing something to a function, adding numbers together, anything where you're doing something or you're taking action in any way is what LangGraph calls a node. So this is a node, this is a node, this is a node, and this is a node. It's just functions, right? So a node can be a plain function, or it can be a function that uses an API call or a model or anything like that. Here we have another terminology known as conditional edge. So conditional edge is essentially conditional. It's just an if-else statement, and it's a type of edge. So instead of go from here to here, it's go from here to here if this. We have the same conditionals here because we can either go down this way or this way. And so LangGraph in the framework itself, when we look at the code in another video, will essentially allow you to provide a router function that will do the job of figuring out what direction to go. If you go down the direct answer node, we just take the edge to end, as we said. And then if you go down the web search, you go down another edge to generate the response and another edge to end, which basically is what you can see here. Now, one of the most important aspects of working with LangGraph is state. And state is essentially just a snapshot of the key properties of the data structure that you're trying to keep track of throughout the lifespan of the workflow. So here, for example, if I define programmatically that I want to keep track of the query, so that's the question, the search results, and the answer. So I define these before the workflow starts to run. When the workflow runs, every time we hit a node, LangGraph gives us the ability to retrieve the current state, to get the current snapshot of the state that we defined initially. So in this case, we can see now that the query is populated because that was the question that was asked by the user. But search results and answer are empty. Makes sense. We don't yet have search results and we don't have the answer. After the conditional edge, we go to web search, and now search results is populated. The same thing with answer is still empty. When we get to the end, we have a state that has the query, search results, and an answer. And you can see the same thing in the studio, where if at every node, you can see what was retrieved and you can view the state of the node at different points after the node has been completed. So here, for example, we can see the entire state of the node, the values that we put in at the beginning that we wanted to track. We can see the answer, the question, router type, search, and the search results. And then we have these other things called checkpoint, which we'll discuss later on, but it's just an ID to identify the particular state at that point in time. And then we have some other properties that allow us to know what node came before, what node came after, and so on. If I go earlier say for example, to this state, you can see that it just says, what is music? It doesn't have values for the other states. And you can see each time I go to another node, the state gets updated. So the job of each node in LangGraph, ideally, most times is to update the state that you defined initially. So we define the state initially, and the state is just, again, it's just a data structure of the things that we want to keep track of, things that we want to generate along the way or keep track of. And each step we're able to add to each of the properties of the state. And if you look deeper into what a state looks like, what the full object of a state, including the values, you can see also includes properties like next, where you can see what is the next node after the current node. And then you can also get the previous node. And so having all this information, knowing what the current state is, knowing what the next node is, knowing what the previous node is extremely useful for building agentic applications because, number one, it allows you to have complete visibility of what is going on at each step of your workflow. For example, let's say I wanted to test the web search. I can go and see, okay, this is what the search results were retrieved, and this is why it caused the answer to be what it is. I can see a snapshot of the state at that point. It also allows for users or yourself to go back in time to a previous state and rerun from there after changing certain things. So for example, you could edit the actual search results. Maybe you want to simulate what would happen if you put different information in and see how reliable your system is. So you can actually edit state from a previous point in time, fork the state, and then rerun the workflow from that point moving forward. So this is very useful for debugging, testing, but also an application like this case where it gives me the ability to roll back. It gives me the ability to go back in time to a checkpoint to run the application from that point. So it's also useful from a user's point of view. And this also enables human in the loop. As I mentioned previously, a lot of the concerns around agentic applications or applications where AI is allowed to be more autonomous is the fear of effectively causing problems without that the human being would not have wanted to happen. And so by doing using something like LangGraph and being able to track state and having state be very defined in this way, you're able at different points to do things like interrupt. For example, if I want to interrupt just before we get to call model, and then I ask the question, let me start a new thread. A new thread is essentially just a new fresh start. And so if I then ask the question, let's see, let's start from here. So what is the latest AI model? If I submit that, you can see that it retrieves the web search, but now this time it's asking for it's pause. And this is a good opportunity where problematically we can ask the user, hey, are you happy with the search results? Shall I proceed to the next step? And if I click continue, it will continue to call model and we reach the end. So this is essentially the brief overview about LangGraph in terms of what's possible with it, why is it relevant, how is it useful. If you're just building very simple applications like this, you don't need to use LangGraph aside from the visibility, debugging tools, and so on. You can just build a simple API calls, simple functions, and just get on with your day. But once you start to do routing or more autonomy, more reasoning, and if you want more control, more flexibility, and the ability to test thoroughly beforehand or see exactly what's happening at each step of the workflow, then LangGraph is for you. So in the next videos to come, we're going to discuss more in terms of how to actually build out these applications programmatically. So you can see how all the visuals that I've shown so far, how all the pieces come together. Cheers.